Well, there you are. I'm actually live. Great. I seem to have two videos doing the same thing here, so that's a bit unfortunate. So let's just make sure that everything's working fine here before I start talking, I guess. Uh, that seems to be looking like it's okay. Do we have, let me just check the audio levels here. Do we have audio? We have audio. Great. Bit of a delay though, bit of a delay. So whatever. Anyway, more or less, I just decided to do a video because I haven't done one in a while. I'm not really prepared or anything, but whatever. There's a lot of things I can talk about here, um, which are kind of interesting. I've been sick for like a month. I had this recurrent shingles episode, which I got nailed by the post COVID stuff, I guess, but seem to have recovered, so that's nice. Anyway, I was going to talk about the the chakras and the mandala. Chakras and the mandala. And this actually isn't, I mean, it's not really a focused lecture here on these things, but it's just some things I've been thinking about. I've been doing a lot of pretty intense study and work in various areas, which just reminded me of one. Yep, I've already got it noted. And yeah, so the chakras, obviously, for the last few years, I've been talking a lot about chakras and their significance and how to work with chakras. And of course, for many people, they don't really connect with the chakras oftentimes, or literally is more of an imaginative exercise. Um, yeah. Now I'm actually taking a course. I've I took a course the last 6 months with this guy Jason Miller, and I'm doing another course of his now, which is interesting. And it's funny because there are a lot of things you learn. I mean, there's a lot of stuff which is kind of just stuff you already know, right? But there are just little sort of tidbits or little sort of perspectives which are interesting. And so one of the things, Jason Miller, he's a well-known magician, right? His website's something like I'm not sure the website, but if you look up strategic sorcery, you will find the website. And he's a guy who spent quite a lot of time in Tibet studying Tibetan Tantra, which is what interested me about him. And so I took one of his Tantra courses, which was really quite interesting. Too much information, almost. Not almost, too much information. Lots of Tibetan mantras to learn, which I couldn't keep up with. But it doesn't really matter because you get the vibe. And a lot of sort of some of the interesting material which flowed out of that and the current class I'm taking with them now is this concept of the mandala, which you hear about the mandala. Obviously, obviously, these dogs, man, they decide to bark right now. They haven't barked all day. Um, Obviously, the mandala. We obviously know of mandalas, which are sort of graphic representations of sort of wheel-like structures, right? But in context of like Tibetan Buddhism or Tantra, the mandala is actually an arrangement of deities, right? Sometimes which are wrathful deities, um, and so they form like an array structure of of divine protection. Protection. Now it's a sort of interesting setup the way it works. And what's been really quite interesting about it for me is it's really quite different than the way I've worked with things, coming from a intuitive viewpoint on the chakras, right? So the intuitive viewpoint in the chakras is quite distinct than the Tibetan viewpoint, which is very well developed. And I might add, really instructive about how to work with various forces. For example, you often hear people talking about, well, you need to be initiated before you work with certain forces because it might be dangerous. And you foolhardily think, well, no, that's not important. I can just move into that area and just work with it. No problem. But as the mandala becomes revealed, you start seeing the logic for this. There is a tendency for a lot of people, and I know this is true for me in a bunch of areas, where you sort of want to move into the advanced levels before you've got foundations ready, before you've actually got foundational skills covered. You want to become advanced, right? Um, I'm sure there's a reason for this, but this can happen. Now, obviously, this is part of the reason why a lot of people take huge amounts of psychedelics, which reminds me of something else too. So, for example, a good example of this is I've been reading the book. It's called, what's it called? Let me just have a quick look up and see what it's called. It's something like LSD and the Diamond Mind, which was recommended to me by my friend David. Um, I can't even see it anymore. I got so many books on this telephone. Um, but that's a good example of this guy whose name I've forgotten, the author of that book, who basically did like 75 more or less hardcore high dose LSD trips in the 70s. And his reasoning for this was that he was having trouble actually learning how to meditate. So he figured he would move into advanced practice using LSD. And it's funny. It's an interesting book. There may be a possibility of interviewing this gentleman, but but it's sort of that kind of thing. Is like where you, rather than getting the fundamentals done and really working the fundamentals, you push forward into an advanced state. And it's kind of interesting because the first half of the book is basically these horrible experiences he's having in LSD, where he's in agony, he's in demonic space, he's right. I mean, it's really, he goes to hell repeatedly, and then of course at the end of it, he has these beautiful experiences. So for him, it seems like it was all worthwhile. But it seems like it's potentially there's a lot of hubris and sort of misguidance going on there, which happens with a lot of people, right? You try and you want to know the secrets, but you don't take the time to learn. A good example of this would be like people, for example, who are trying to like open their third eye, right? Got to open the third eye, got to open the third eye, but they haven't actually worked on the root chakra or the Svadhisthana or Manipura, right? Anahata. They haven't done anything, but they got to open the third eye. And that's a pretty good example of what they call it, jumping the shark, right? It's not preparing the ground for what's to come. Now, what tends to happen is people think, well, if you open the third eye, you'll have visions and stuff, and that is possible, right? But the truth is, working with root chakra material is really amazing, right? I mean, it's a really amazing place to be. It's just that people don't spend the time in this because they're too busy trying to advance to what they think is a higher space, which isn't actually, it's not really a higher space, right? It's just a different space, right? It's kind of like if you were going to go up the summit of Everest, you might actually get a better view from base camp, right? With none of the dangers, right? But if you go up to the top, I mean, there were some problems. I was watching some videos on Everest this a couple of weeks ago, and apparently there's a point in Everest called the Hillary Pass, which has actually been breaking off, and a couple of people were walking across it and died. It just broke off and they went down. Goodbye, right? And what was amazing about the Everest video was there's like I didn't realize that. You think, wow, people going up to Everest like Sir Edmund Hillary, these like mountaineering pioneers, but now it's like tourism. So there's these huge chains of people going up and down, getting led by various Sherpas, right? It's just like hundreds of people per day. It's like wow, and it's a really life-threatening situation. So that's a pretty good analogy for what's happening spiritually. Is like people are scaling Everest without a Sherpa, without putting on the crampons and the special boots, without wearing any special clothes. And they're just going up there because we can do it, right? By will. And there's a chance you could go up there. I know some of the Sherpas have gone up before without any oxygen. 20, was it 20,000 feet? I've been up at, I was up in northern Chile and we went up to, what was that called? I don't, there's a town up in northern Chile called Calama where all the mining companies are. And I went up there one time to visit my mother, and it wasn't 20,000 feet. I think it might have been 12,000 feet. And I had to get out of there. I was dying. Just not, I was actually fine in the town, but we decided to go up the little hill just to go and see the mining company. Oh, it was like panic attack. No oxygen, no oxygen. Got to get out of here. So, yeah, it's a sort of rarefied atmosphere. Um, I'm just trying to think here if I can, hold on a second. What? No, okay. I'm just trying to think if I can put lights on outside, the dogs might not bark. So that was what that was all about there. Anyway, so we have this sort of rarefied environment, and the idea is, can we discover a way to scale through these heights in a way which is relatively safe? So the sort of interesting part of this is there's a bunch of interesting parts of it. Is this whole is the concept of the mandala. Now, in context of the chakras, there's like it's sort of interesting because I was just on to Chat GPT just recently because I've been working quite a lot with Chat GPT, and then what I do is I filter like Chat GPT is really not reliable a lot of the times. So I take the answers that Chat GPT gives me and I run it through a couple of other AI systems just to make sure it's not screwing around with me, um, just to check. And so, oh, there's somebody said something there. And so the idea is, here we go, is the chakras. Okay, so typically when people are talking, I mean, it's very, very common. Um, exactly. It's very common when people are working with the chakras, and even ChatGPT is doing this. Is like each chakra has a Sanskrit letter associated with it, right? Which are typically called the Bihar mantras. Or is it Bihar? I'm like totally um, whatever. Bihar mantras. So it's usually lam, vam, ram, yam, ham, om, om, right? And so that would be one letter assigned for each chakra. And so people are commonly told to meditate on those letters and just meditate on the letters. And a lot of times people do it and they don't actually know what they're meditating on. They're just saying these words and they're not really sure why. And sometimes it can be valuable to not know what the meaning is if because there's so many different sort of points of focus and consciousness. So for example, you just focus on the sort of vibratory material of the mantra. There's a bunch of different ways of approaching, obviously. But what's actually also true is if most chakra charts, if you look at them, actually have Sanskrit letters mapped out on every single letter, right? Every single petal of the chakra, because the chakras are typically represented as lotuses, um, and they have Sanskrit letters associated with them. And what's interesting is that it depends really on the branch of Tantra you're looking at, or Vedanta, whatever it is, right? But they'll have different interpretations. And obviously in Buddhism, they've got only got five chakras in Buddhism, and they've got different associations in Buddhism. And there's an important point to that too, because people often think, well, which one's right? And then the tree of life's also a sort of chakra system, and well, that's denied by some people. I think Jason Miller says that it's not the same thing, right? It's it's not the same, but it is the same. Uh, the That's 11 chakras, and so all of them are right, right? I mean, basically, what happens is it doesn't really matter. I think all that's happening is it's a sort of a matrix or a mandala of information which consciousness uses to sort of pre-approve you for higher information, if you will, right? So if consciousness is sitting watching who can ascend up here, who is who has got the skill to skillfully ascend, then it doesn't really matter which system you use, right? Because ultimately they're all based on narratives, which are they're ephemeral ladders, uh, which are basically just there to as tests. In any event, we've got these letters, right? And so we do have these original letters, which are the Biha mantras, which are often associated with the chakras. But then we've also got these like individual petal letters. Now, for a long time, I've been advocating how certain ways of working with the chakras, and but there's some really what happens is the more you can immerse yourself in the knowledge, the pre-existing knowledge of the chakras, the more it's going to allow you to sort of have a sort of conscious opening into that space. Um, for example, a lot of people will think about opening the third eye chakra, and they'll think, okay, I'm just going to, like, because the standard approach in many advanced books is just to sort of raise your eyes up so it's looking up at the third eye chakra and just say and just do that, right? Um, that could probably work, but I tend to think that it really is about consciousness, right? It's really about consciousness and how we approach our conscious understanding of what these structures are, right? And so just looking up and saying while it might work, um, I think it's a much more effective technique to not just look up and say which again can be effective, but it's also to allow your mind to explore the sort of tertiary meanings of what those chakras present. So, for example, the third eye is a pretty good example since there's only two petals on the third eye, right? And so the third eye presents two petals, and the Sanskrit letters are Ha. And now my pronunciation is bad here because I haven't studied Sanskrit really. So it's like Ha and Ksha with a K, Ksha and Ha. And um, and so now, because like otherwise you're thinking, and it's interesting. I don't know about you, but like when I meditate on the chakras, there are some chakras I find very easy to meditate on, But then, for example, I find the third eye particularly tricky to meditate on, just because, for example, like you'll have like 16 petals here, 10 petals, then all of a sudden you have here just two petals, and it's like, why? Why is there only two, right? Why are there only two? And so there, it's sort of these questions arise about why are there only two petals and what's going on here, and like, why is this happening? And so it presents an opportunity for greater understanding. So what's interesting is, as we know, Ida and Pingala, we've got Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna, the three channels. Sushumna, the central channel, Ida and Pingala, right? And hold on a second. I'm just gonna have to check my nomenclature here just so I don't sound like an idiot. Is okay. Ida and Pingala, here we go, right? So Ida is the lunar channel. Pingala is the solar channel. That's why there's two petals at the third eye. Gets the termination point of Ida and Pingala. So there's kind of like a development. We've got four petals which emerge from the root chakra, right? And those terminate in two petals, representing the sort of terminated energy in the third eye. Now, there's a bunch of ways of interpreting it. You know, it's masculine, it's feminine, it's magnetic, it's electric, it's lunar, it's solar, right? We've already got a bunch of it's ksha and it's ha. That's a whole bunch of different information about what's going on. Now, like, who cares, right? Who cares about the information? But what you're looking for here is you're looking for, you see, people have problems focusing concentration, right? They can't concentrate. And so what this information does is it gives you other ways to sort of have a moving, it's almost like a walking meditation. You're not walking, your mind is moving. It's like it's a moving meditation in your mind. And you've got these new data points. Okay, it's masculine and feminine, masculine and feminine, right? So you might be doing this like a lot of times in my mind. What I'm doing is I'll be visualizing the petals. And so rather than just focusing up and looking up mindlessly up at this and saying, I'm like, it's like, see how my hands moving there? It's like masculine. You see how it's got a sort of like, it's got a sort of like tapering feel to it. And there's like a style. There's like a style. It's almost like artistic. Like I'm almost like cultivating the energy of the masculine and the feminine, right? And then if it is masculine and feminine, there's like it's the feminine's magnetic and this is electric, and so that's got all kinds of evocative uh, vibes to it, right? And right there, solar and electric, and so my point is those three concepts, and there's more than three, obviously, but the concept of lunar, feminine, magnetic, those three concepts form, hopefully not that my internet's just died. Those three concepts form a constellation. Um, Let me just check here that the internet looks like it's dying here. Is that true? Shouldn't be. The hope it's not died. I believe the internet went away. This is really unfortunate. I'm going to move my telephone here, see if I can get some better reception. I think we're in 5G though, right? We've got 5G, it should be okay. Um, anyway, hopefully you'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. There's like a constellation of information which which acts almost like an attractor to pull the mind into this um, into more concentration, right? It's an attractive vortex. The information is an attractive vortex. And so what you allow your mind to do is you might just allow your mind to move around those three concepts: magnetic, feminine, lunar. Now, there's a measure of creativity you can use with this kind of interpretation. So, for example, you might, as you're sort of cultivating the sense of the petal, you might allow yourself to contemplate the magnetic sensation of what is it magnetic? Do you feel anything magnetic? Maybe you can't. Maybe you can imagine what magnetic feels, right? Maybe you can imagine what that feels like. And then the and how is lunar feminine? But there's lots of myths about the moon being a feminine power, right? And then there's the magnetic um, but then the moon is obviously magnetic to the tides. There's a whole bunch of these other sort of conceptions. Hey, vegan dolls, long time no see, which allows you to sort of I'm going to use the Spanish word. It's enredar. It's like tangle, tangle your mind into the concept, right? Now you might think like if you're thinking about this and you're thinking about okay, electric, solar, magnetic, lunar, you might think, well, I'm just like pretending here. I'm just imagining it's not real. I don't really feel this. But this is one of the interesting little small detail Jason Miller had mentioned was he was saying that there's a difference between a vision and a visualization, right? And so the visualization is one of the sort of preliminary preparations. So what happens is when you're building a visualization, you're building an imaginative or an astral structure, which at when you begin, there is no spiritual content yet. It's literally just an imaginative structure. But what happens is the more you cultivate the visualization, the more it has a tendency to attract the vision. And the vision is a spontaneous event, right? It's a spontaneous event. Bah. So that's a sort of interesting way of doing it. And then of course you can just and there's a sort of process here which is sort of alchemical, right? There's an alchemical process here. And by alchemy, I mean changing the form. That's interesting, Gary. Um, but there's a possibility of changing the form. So, for example, you can start off thinking, okay, it's a petal. It's a violet petal, right? Or is it indigo or violet? I can't remember. Let's just say it's violet, right? It's a violet petal. And you've got this petal. And I recommend you think of it like very sensually because that also gets the mind straight into the space of delight, if you will, right? And then once you got that going, that's when you might start to transform the interpretation into okay, it's a magnetic feeling, it's an electric, and you actually try and feel this feeling, right? And so what you've done is you've transformed it from a color into a sort of feeling sensation, right? Um, and then you might transform it into okay, it's lunar and solar, and that's less of a sort of feeling, and it's more of a sort of intellectual conceptualization. And so we're thinking about the feeling, or sorry, and then we're moving out to the intellect, right? And what does that mean, right? There's a sort of structure of meaning about what those ideas might be. So what we've actually done is we've moved from the sensual to the feeling or emotional into the mental vibrational state. And then you might move it into the Sanskrit state after that, Kasha and Ha. Let me just make sure I've got the letters right here so I'm not sounding like a complete idiot, right? Throat chakra. Yeah. Okay, it's Ham and Kasam. Like I'm glad I looked that up. So what's interesting here, you guys, what's interesting is those letters have associations too. Now, these are rough associations, and the associations you'll find like in other resources than ChatGPT will have often have a more sort of divine focused interpretations. A lot of time, ChatGPT will spit out stuff which sounds more like canned sort of personal development stuff. And you have to sort of say to it, can you give divine interpretation rather than this stuff? But here's one. So Ham, um, let me just make sure which is uh, more info, which is lunar. Okay. Okay, so Ham is the lunar energy, right? It represents eternity, the timeless aspects of consciousness transcending present, past, and future. It represents timelessness, connecting with the eternal now, and where all moments are one, and the infinite existence, symbolizing the boundless nature of the soul, extending beyond physical limitations. That's the lunar aspect, right? So dude, we've got a lot of stuff we can contemplate here. And what's beautiful about this is because contemplation. It's the contemplation. It's looking at the relationships between these concepts and just looking. And what happens is the more the more you look, because essentially these ideas are like divine ideas. And what happens is the more you look at them, it's like consciousness starts purifying. Just the action of focusing your consciousness on these concepts, and also not just moving through. The thing is, as I was saying, move from the sensual to the feeling to the intellect. It's not, you can do that, but what you want to do is when you're doing that, you want to be specifically aware that you're doing that. You want to be aware of the conscious process of changing the modality of observation, right? You know how they say in quantum physics, like if you like observation changes the situation. This is what I'm talking about here. Is like when you are consciously aware of, okay, I'm changing my mode of observation now to the mental plane, and now I'm moving to the divine letters because the Sanskrit is considered divine letters. And that's not unique to Sanskrit, right? I mean, it's also like in Kabbalah, Hebrews, divine. In the Nordic, the runes are divine. Um, in Tibetan, the Tibetan script is divine. Um, Sam, and I know my pronunciation is bad. What? Dude, that is crazy. Hold on a second. Ham, said ham, are both lunar. Yeah, you see, you can't trust. Yeah, there we go. Dude, I swear to God, like ChatGPT is so confused about this stuff. Wow. In context of third eye only, please. Let's see this. Um, Unbelievable. Anyway, let me just go through what the Sam is. So Sam points to the subtle, unseen nature of higher states of awareness, transcendence beyond the physical, and energy. Now, GPT is now saying both of those are lunar energies, which is not true, but it's confused. But the point is that with more study, it gives this sort of constellation of information which allows you to pivot through the different energy bodies, right, from the physical and moving through these things. But of course, what I was saying when I started is that people are always trying to scale Everest without actually having the basic information. And you might want to work on the third eye because, wow, it's so amazingly interesting. Um, and I could open my third eye and see spirits. But the thing is that everything you can do in the you can do in the root chakra, right? And the root chakra is actually as cool. There's four petals, of course, right? There's four petals, and that gives it's just more material to contemplate. And so the thing is that dude, it's so amazing to just allow yourself to get into these contemplations. Let me just find the Muladhara. So, four petals: Vam, Sham, Sham, and Sam. And there are some pronunciation differences there based on like tongue positions. So Vam is that the eastern or the western? Man, I've forgotten. I've been thinking of it as the eastern petal. Stability, grounding, connection to earth, peace, calmness. Sham, the first is peace, calmness, inner peace. Niksham is purity, clarity, purity of mind and body. And Sam is harmony, balance, integration of opposites. Plus, all of these things have information associated with the elements. Obviously, the root chakra is associated with the earth element, and obviously, the root chakra has the governing divinity being Ganesh, right? So this is another way you can pull this up. It allows you to move through these different transmutations, and actually end up after for example, a good way of doing this is when you start contemplating the letters and the meaning of the letters. And there's a bunch of ways of doing the letters. Uh, like I like doing it, for example, just a pronunciation and like actually looking at the position of the mouth and the position of the tongue. That will sort of tie this sort of the physical architecture of your mouth as you say the specific syllables. That's a divine thing. That structure at that moment is a divine posture, right? I would call those oral postures, right? And then you could also visualize the letters themselves and allow your mind, in the same way as you cultivate the energy around each chakra, you might allow your consciousness to move around the curvature of each letter and start sort of observing the flow and interaction and the intention of the individual angles of lines and curvatures and how they interact. And as you're doing this, like one way you might do this too is if you imagine that you've got like a four petaled let's pretend let's pretend let's pretend this is a four. Let me see if I can get a square out of this piece of paper. Okay, let's pretend this is a four petaled lotus, right? Each corner being the actual point of the petal. Obviously it's an abstraction, but what you might do is there's so many ways. What you have to do with this stuff is you have to be playful with the architecture of the of the of the chakra. And nobody tells you to do this. People just say just think about the chakra or focus on the chakra. But what does focus even mean? What does that mean? Like if you're focusing, are you focusing at it from like 5 feet away? Are you focusing at it like here at this distance? Right? And so what I say is like what you can do is you allow your consciousness to rove around the chakra, right? So for example, if these represent the tips of the petal, move slowly around the tips of the petal, right? And then maybe you would allow your consciousness to spiral in, right? Maybe as you're doing this, and this is like people are often looking for like prescriptive practices, like do this to be enlightened. Do this and become enlightened. Don't do anything to be enlightened. Do it because it's fucking awesome, right? Because once you start doing this, it's so unfucking believable. what happens. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Just get into the process, right? So don't listen to me and think, oh, well, Scott said spiral, nothing's happening. And then you're not doing it right, right? Find something which interests, find something that engages you, right? So, for example, one of the things I often do is I'll actually, I might spin around. I might actually start here, then move in and then out, then up here, and then move in and then out, in and out, right? But it's just basically it's looking for an engaging movement in this. What you're trying to do is you're trying to engage the mind, because once you engage the mind, you have concentration. And concentration is where magic happens. Without concentration, you have nothing. Nothing's going to happen. But once you get concentration, then you can start transforming the concepts. You can start transforming it from a movement into a posture, right? Then you can start focusing on the Sanskrit letters or the feelings of, I mean, now it's not magnetic and electric anymore, or is it? And then the other thing, I mean, like the mystery of the root chakra is the root chakra is where Kundalini emerges from. So you can start contemplating, like, well, where does the Kundalini emerge from? Try doing that. Start querying. Well, I'm moving my consciousness around here. Where is the Kundalini? Right? Does the Kundalini emerge from the tips of the petals? Right? Does the Kundalini emerge from the center? What happens if I allow my consciousness to go into, because it's a petal, right? Do I allow my consciousness to go inside, in here, into like where the, if it was a flower, is where like the stamen would be of the flower, right? Is that where I go? And what does that mean? What happens? And like, what is a lotus? And what is the stem? Well, that's like the stamen is like the reproductive organs of the flower, right? So is what does that mean if my consciousness goes in there? What does that mean? Is that where Kundalini is? Is that where it exists? That contemplation. And what you do is you're not trying to achieve anything here. This is genuine curiosity, right? It's a curious contemplation of what the meaning is. Because all the books in the world will teach you nothing. You have to contemplate it for yourself. It will mean something different to you, right? For example, some books say, like, no, the chakras aren't lined up with your body. They're actually horizontal, right? That's where they are. Other ones say, no, they're not flat. They've actually got like a vortex coming out of it. Dude, none of that stuff matters. That's just an interpretation. Doesn't matter, right? Um, I can tell you right now, I wasn't thinking about any of that stuff when I blew Kundalini out of my head. None of that stuff was important. None of it. I was just intuitively going. See, what happens is once you catch the vibe, what happens is there are like wisps of your personal magic, which you're just not in touch with yet. You know, you're just not, you don't even recognize it yet. But what it is, it's based on the stuff which you love most. And so what you got to do is you've got to sort of contemplate and get into it like in a way which really appeals to you, because that's the key into Kundalini. It's not trying to follow a prescriptive plan of like how you raise your Kundalini. No, no, no. You just go into this and you find about, I don't meditate on chakras because it's something I should do. I do it because it's fucking awesome. It's amazing. Right? It's because I want this. It's amazing. And what happens is the more you do it, the more it expands. It expands. What's interesting too, like on a macro level, is if you look at yantras such as the Sri yantra. You know the Sri yantra, it's the one with it's like a square, three triangles going down, three triangles going up. And that's the yantra in a bunch of traditions, but particularly the Sri Vidya tantric tradition in India. And all those shapes have a meaning, right? It's a mandala. That's literally a mandala, right? And The outer structure of that is a square, and the square has like four sort of doors actually on each side of it, right? What does that mean? Well, obviously it's four-sided, so that sort of corresponds to the four petals of the chakras. But this could also correspond, if you will, to like base camp, right? And so those sides of the square could represent the walls of the, well, in Kabbalah, what often happens is when people are doing path working in the tree of life, they'll often move into Malkuth and visualize a four-sided room in which there's an archangel on each side of the room, which is there to protect you at this first level of spiritual awareness. Now, people tend not to think about that when they're working with the chakras. They're just like, okay, I'm going to like turn my kundalini on. And they haven't actually thought about, wait a minute, is there actually a better process? If you look at some of these other practices like Tibetan Buddhism and the Sri Vidya, they evoke spirits or deities at these doors to protect you. Because the truth is that there's lots of hardcore negative energy, um, negative energy which can enter into your space, right? And so part of this is allowing your mind to contemplate the root structure and learning how to connect with these root spirits who are actually there to protect you. Before you go up to the fucking third eye chakra, right? Which is incredibly dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, I guess. It doesn't have to be. The truth is, when I blew the Kundalini out, I didn't know what I was doing, but seemed to have survived okay. But certainly the path to that was fraught with danger, right? There was lots of negative events before that. Let me just check my notes here to make sure I'm still talking about what I was planning on talking about. What's interesting too is the in the Kabbalah, and I've spoken about the book of Franz Bardon, Key to the True Kabbalah, lots of times. Much like the Sanskrit letters, the Kabbalists also focus on the letters. Now, in the Jewish Kabbalah, they're focusing on the Hebrew letters. They venerate the letters. Each letter is like a ray of divinity, right? So, coming out of Malkuth, you have two paths. Well, in the Hermetic Kabbalah, you've got two paths going up to I forgot the names of them. What are those? Like Netzach and what's it called? I've got a tree of life here on my desktop. Hod and Netzach. So in the Hermetic Kabbalah, that's equivalent to Mercury and Venus, right? Which is a fascinating contemplation. It's a fascinating contemplation because Mercury is the intellect and Venus is the desire. And so what the Kabbalistic mandala, because the tree of life is a form of mandala, right? And you may have seen this, that the tree of life is sort of structured like with the Sephiroth and then the Sephiroth grows. But there's also other diagrams of the tree of life where you'll see it like centric circles, which is way more mandala like, right? It's a mandala structure, right? So I guess what I'm proposing here, yeah, I'm not really, I'm just on talking, right? But if I was proposing something, I guess what I would propose is more profound contemplation of the root structures. Now, part of the reason people aren't doing this generally is because there's just no information about it, right? I mean, most of the people who are doing this work have just had a few big LSD trips and they're thinking they want to be enlightened now and they're going to start focusing, they're going to start saying Om into their third eye chakra and see what happens. But what really needs to happen is a sort of more profound contemplation of what the spiritual base camp. I think I'll change the name of the video to that. Spiritual base camps, um, which is the first level of the mandala. Now, what's interesting, if you look at the 3D versions of it, they've got sculptures of it. And so what happens in the 3D sculptures is the square is down at the bottom and it builds up into a mountain structure. It's like a pyramidal structure. And so each different level, which corresponds with the chakras, works. And of course, in Sri Vidya Tantra, one of the practices is nyasa. And what you do is you contemplate the position of the points of the chakra or the points of the Sri Vidya or the Sri chakra in your body. And what you do is you become aware, you contemplate which deities are associated with those points, and you contemplate which elements, and you install the elements into different points in your bodies. And so, what this does is it creates a framework. It's like a literal protective matrix around your body as you're moving into these rarefied states. And I actually don't study Hebrew Kabbalah that much. There's a book I'm actually thinking of buying. Like, oh, I gotta see if that's available actually, which looks really good um, about that. But there's, but in the Hermetic Kabbalah is basically the building of a of a mandala. And so, like I was saying, it can seem like, well, why do I want to focus on letters? But if you read Key to the True Kabbalah, like there's some really profound stuff happening with letters. So, for example, if you were going to do like magical spells, right, you might evoke a spirit and ask the spirit for help, but that creates a karmic connection. But Franz Bardon always says that, if you tune into the actual vibratory signature of the letters themselves, that's actually that's actually where the power comes from, actually. And so there's no karmic. You have to be very careful because you're responsible for anything you do with this stuff, right? Because it's very powerful. And somebody was asking me the other day, like, how would you do healings on people? And so there's obviously ways you can do it. You can like visualize energy and do spells or whatever. But one of the better ways of doing it is just to evoke Kabbalistic letters or Sanskrit letters, right? Which uh, which have that kind of power. Or just, I think one of the other ways of doing it too is not is moving into the Akashic field and having an intention before you move into it, and then things sort of. What I think the thing is, if you're sort of pushing energy yourself, it's more of a sort of ego based sort of intentionality. It can still work, right? But I think just like I think the preferred ways of doing this are just like evoking divine letters or moving into Akasha and doing stuff from there. I think it's about an hour, and I'm gonna wrap things up now because my internet's got a tendency of like dying at about 9 o'clock, which is about 9 o'clock where I am right now. I think I got about 2 minutes before it dies completely. And I think I said more or less what I was gonna talk about here. Um, so yeah. Um, so I may have an interview coming up here in a little bit. And sorry I've been gone for a while. I was really quite ill there for a month. Really bad, but I'm back to normal now, looks like, which is good news. And yeah, that's about it. Anyway, take care, you guys. And